Creating dance performances to help lend a voice to people often overlooked, using movement and culture to enable conversation, to examine how shifting power balances affect people's worlds on the global and local level. Our guest today has a background in peace and conflict research and uses dance to talk about division. His company crosses the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, a line that is a century old this year, and which has of course been in the news much of late due to Brexit and rows over vaccinations. Mr. Dylan Quinn, welcome to the show and thank you for your time. Maybe tell us firstly perhaps about this border. A lot of your work examines that dividing line and the impact of it on the lives around you. How has that changed, if at all, since the start of this year with that full withdrawal of the UK from the EU?
Well, I think the whole impact of Brexit has had a massive impact on the people living along the border. For many years when I grew up, it was a militarised border, so there was a police and an army presence on it. And then that process changed as peace kind of came upon the island of Ireland, and the Good Friday Agreement in 1998 changed the very structure of Ireland, really, in terms of the movement across the border. And then whilst that's not changed in terms of any infrastructure or anything, the concept of it, or the feeling of it, has changed dramatically as a result of Brexit because of that need for an EU border now. And that has dramatically impacted on how people feel about what is happening around them, and the fact that they feel decisions are being made in other places that impact on them greatly, and they don't have a lot of say in it. And that's, I suppose, what most of my work tries, or some of my work tries to reflect. It is the voice of the people who live in this place and are affected by the border, and who are impacted on by decisions made by others who are not aware of the context and the real impact on them.
That feeling of isolation and division, I mean, how can dance help address that?
Well, it's really about giving people a voice and finding alternative ways to engage in conversations. An awful lot of the time that we end up having conversations in boardrooms in various places around the world. But there are lots of people who experience the world in very different ways. And the Censored Culture in Ireland allowed myself, as one of the artists, one of the 40 artists, the Irish artists, to engage in a conversation, I suppose. And as an artist, I engage both through dance, but also through the spoken word. But primarily my language in terms of creative engagement is through dance. So for me, it's about working with people using dance as a way to, I suppose, communicate, both in terms of a message that is sent, but also to build relationships with people, and then to allow them to be able to voice their opinions, to voice their concerns, to share their experiences. And we do that in a variety of different ways. And we have done that with participatory work, so that we engage people in those, and actually through dance films, through dance performances, we will allow them to talk about their experiences. And then along with that, I do it as a professional practice. And some of the work that you may have seen is where I place a stage over the border, and we talk about, through dance, we talk about the impact of power and the impact of control, and the forces that are put upon us by other people. So it's finding an alternative way to share voices and to give people an opportunity to both speak, but also to be listened to.
Indeed, Dylan, as you've been speaking, we've been looking at some of that performance with the stage over the border. I'm wondering, what kind of reactions and feedback have you got from audiences that have seen your work?
Well, the support has all been very positive around here. I mean, I'm from here. I'm from Enniskillen, and I'm of this place. So, I grew up miles away from the border, and I live a little bit closer to the border now, having returned 20 odd years ago. And so I know the people well and the place well. And also, I think people here are interested in finding voices and allowing their voice to be heard. And I've done some really interesting work in the village of Pettico, which is divided right the way down the middle by the border, where people were really interested in engaging in those conversations because they felt a lot that they're not heard. So the response has been very positive. And indeed, with the Addressing the Nations presentation that we were giving, that response was extremely positive, because it was about giving voice to artists and kind of countering the amount of political debates or political presentations we've heard over the last year because of COVID particularly. So the response in general is very positive, because I think there's a need and a desire to get more voices out there, so that there are alternative ways of thinking about things to solve some of the very complicated issues that we have to deal with, including the likes of Brexit and COVID and the impact of a border which is now, as you mentioned, 100 years on the island of Ireland this year.
Indeed, Dylan, I listened to the Irish Cultural Centre's Addressing the Nations. You took part in the first one. They are ongoing and viewers can watch them right up until, I believe, the 28th of February is the last one, but they're still on the website as well if you want to look back, Centre Culturel Irlandais. But in your address to the nation, Dylan, you expressed both a frustration at the growing inequality across the world, but also quite a hope in humans. Which do you think has the upper hand?
Oh, that's a difficult question. That's a difficult question. I hope the hope for humans and the fact that we find new ways and we reimagine our societies and work together. But I think that takes really concentrated action and collective action. I think it's a real push that we need. There are significant challenges, not just of our own making or in terms of political, but also obviously issues like climate change, which to a large degree are our own making. So that we do need to work very hard and in a sustainable way in order to change a lot of the impacts that we have. And we see that around the world, and we've seen that with migration crisis, and we may well see the increase of those because of climate change. So there are a whole variety of things, not just the political context in Ireland, but the world around us and our ecology. So I like to be hopeful and hope that we can find a ways around that. But I think there needs to be a real gear shift in the movement, and Brexit has demonstrated how sometimes those gear shifts can go in a way that you didn't quite plan on, and there was no planning essentially for it. And I think even the state of Northern Ireland is one of those issues where we still have to figure out how to resolve long-standing problems and not just stick our head in the sand and think that it will resolve itself. It won't. Humans have to take proper actions and proper decisions and work effectively to make it better for the world in general.
Okay, so revolution or evolution, as you said in that address, needs to happen. And now we've been looking at how culture, you say, can unite. Yet I've read that you say the value put on culture is quite different on both sides of that border.
Oh, hugely different. I mean, and even if you talk about it in financial contribution, the amount of money that is provided to the arts sector and the creative sector in the Republic of Ireland is much, much, much greater than it is in Northern Ireland. And there are a variety of different complicated reasons for that. In terms of, in Northern Ireland, it's very difficult for a full community to coalesce around what is their cultural identity because of the complex nature of identity in Northern Ireland, whereas that's much easier in the Republic. So they have essentially, although it may sound crass, brand Ireland, where they can send out that message, and the cultural identity of Ireland is known the world over, and indeed there's a permanent residency for Irish artists in Paris with the Centre Culturel Irlandais. So it's, there's a real sense of what that is in the Republic, whereas in the North, it's much more complicated, and the support for that. So it's partly, I refer a little bit to the financial value, but actually it's not. It's about how it's held in people's hearts, and therefore the message that you send out to people and its value that's put into it by political decision makers, in terms of how you engage people in that process as well. So it's a very complicated issue because it's to do with identity and people's sense of being and sense of belonging. And whilst that is contradicted or complicated in Northern Ireland, it will always be a thing that's never probably supported appropriately, really. Yet they are the voices that can help us think about things differently.
Indeed, I think that's a lovely note to end it on. Dylan Quinn, thanks so much for taking time out to speak to us and bring us your perspective here on France 24. Much appreciated.